Good evening, everyone. Kyle with Andrew Hilton here. Welcome back. Our beer tasting tonight is going to be a brewery focus on Annex and a discussion of pale ales in all their wonderful forms. We'll touch on Annex a little bit here first. It's been a day, so let's get right into our first beer. We're going to start with the Annex Forward Progress Pale Ale. Normally I like to start with some preamble, but it has been a Wednesday, so we're going to get right into it today. Annex has been around since 2017. This is the brainchild of Erica O'Gorman and Andrew Bullied. Andrew is an ex-head brewmaster at Calgary's Village Brewing. And Annex, I was kind of shocked to find out when I looked this up online, has only been around since 2017. It feels like they've been around so much longer. Because Annex has been one of those brewing touchstones that they keep coming back to and saying, oh, well, I like the Blind Man New England Pale. What other New England Pale should I try? Well, Force Mejeure. Oh, I love Sierra Nevada. What do we have that's like that isn't, overpriced and American? Well, Forward Progress. And they also have made some really, really remarkable seasonals over the years. And for some reason, Annex has always been just kind of there. And I don't mean that in a bad way. They're not, a bad brewery. They're not someone who's not very cutting edge. They've just always kind of been reliably there, providing excellent beers for us, and I'm really pleased to have them tonight. Let's get into pale ales as a style in general and where pale ale comes from. Pale ale is, in the grand scheme of things, not the oldest beer style in the world, and that comes back to how we make beer. Now, it's fairly difficult in a 16th century, 17th century sense to make a pale beer, and that comes down to the fact that all the barley that we use for beers tends to be malted. And that's true of rye, it's true of most wheat. Basically, if you're using a cereal grain to make a beer, you malt it. And the reason for that is that the malting process takes all those complex starches that are present in the grain, and it actually converts them into simple sugars. Now, how you do that is kind of a 3 or 4 step process. You start it by wetting the grain, and then you lay it out on the ground and you let it sit kind of damp and warm, and you let it begin to sprout. And what it's doing when it's beginning to sprout is the plant itself is taking all those complex carbohydrates that are very, very difficult for yeast to ferment and turning them into simple sugars. And while it's doing that, it's gently sending out, a first kind of green shoot. It's starting to establish its root systems, but you don't want seedlings, you want beers, so you kind of have to stop that at some point. And you stop that by drying or roasting the barley. You stop it with heat. So what heat source do you use? Well, prior to about 1650, there was peat, there was barley, there was firewood. There weren't a lot of really good sources out there, certainly not clean sources of heat. And as a result, when you were drying barley, specifically like if we're thinking about Scottish barley, you ended up with a very strong smoky, woody flavor off of that. What changed in 1650 was the invention of Coke. Not, the drug, not the beverage. Basically the world's first form of charcoal, which was basically created by taking scraps of raw coal, combining them with charcoal, and basically creating the world's very first charcoal briquette. If you've ever hiked up to the old coal mining town of Lille up in the Crow's Nest Pass, they have a big line of brick coke ovens that were imported from France in the 1800s at great expense and then abandoned when they abandoned the town. So Coke was a hot burning, very clean burning fuel that wouldn't give you a whole bunch of off characters because that was baked out when they created the Coke, and it would give you this hot, clean heat. And that allowed you to toast the barley without adding smoky flavors, without roasting it, introducing color, which would give you a crisp, clean, dry, pale malt, which is what led to the very first pale ales. Now, the very first pale ales came from a place called Burton-on-Trent, which had notoriously sulfuric, and when I say sulfuric, I mean sulfate, so salts of sulfur in the water, creating a very, very, very hard water, which took very, very naturally to this new pale malt, and it also took really naturally to hopping. I apologize if you're picking up a bunch of background noise. We're actually kind of busy at the moment in the store, so sorry about that. But yeah, these pale ales came out of Burton-on-Trent. They eventually evolved into English bitters, and that's, for about 300 years where things kind of chug along. Let's fast forward a bit to about 1975. And in 1975, the last of the craft breweries is almost at the point of dying out. This is when Fritz Maytag, heir to the Maytag Appliances fortune, bought the struggling Anchor Brew Company in San Francisco and restarted it with a focus on quality. We'll come back to that in a minute, but because he proved that he could do it, he actually inspired the New Albion Brewing Company, which only existed for about 5 years between 1975 and 1980 and 1981. And basically their whole thing was making a bright, fresh, clean, American-style pale ale with a fairly fresh, hop-forward focus that nobody had really seen before, at least not in a very long time. They were pioneers. They literally started the home brewing movement, and the founder, whose name isn't coming immediately to mind, is an absolute legend in the brewing industry, to the point that the actual original New Albion Brewing sign, their very first business sign, actually hangs in the Russian River Brewing Company brewery to this day. It's actually signed by the guy who started the brewery. And then building on that, we ended up with Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, which opened a couple years later. This American-style pale ale, which is to say a bright, fresh, clean, dry beer at about 5.5–6% alcohol. This one's at 5.2, with really bright, fresh, forward hop character. Now we're going to get into what IPAs mean probably when we get to the meats and bounds, and get into a little bit of a history of IPA, because there's the real story and then there's the total BS story, and they are somewhat interlinked. But the idea of a fresh, clean, bright, hop-forward style, we now throw around the term American Pale Ale like it's been around forever. Well, it hasn't. It's been around since about 1980 when, Sierra Nevada got going. But this style, this bright, fresh, pretty clean style with this nice biscuity forward malt that's, kind of in the background, and then the hops are allowed to play. I love this style. This is a very refreshing, pretty style, and I really like when it's done well. And yes, for those very sharp-eyed like Sean in the back, yes, next week we are going to Pilsner Town. We'll get to that in a minute. Sorry, Jeremy. I don't know if we didn't notice, but yeah, we are on the forward progress. I'm just going to jump up here for the comments. I'm a little behind. So do please let me know how you like this one. I will be with you in a second as I check up on the comment section. Pilsner Town, Five of Diamonds. The Five of Diamonds looms, it doesn't lurk. Mount Crushmore Pilsner, and okay, spoilers, but the last beer that you can't see behind me is the Pontificato Italian Pils by SYC, which is a beer I like so well that it kind of was the inspiration to do a Pilsner week. So that's kind of pale ale as we take it up to today. You know, invented in the 1700s in the UK, kind of transmogrified into English bitter, and then kind of reintroduced into the craft beer scene in the mid-1970s, early 1980s in California at Anchor, New Albion, and Sierra Nevada. And from there, it absolutely blew up because just like kind of Alberta craft beer scene kind of blew up starting in 2013, California's craft beer scene really started taking off in the 80s into the early 90s and continues through to today. Yeah, so that's our introduction to pale ales. So what's an India Pale Ale then? And for those of you for whom this is kind of a step back, I do want to cover some of the basics as we go along. We'll cover the history side of an India Pale Ale when we get to the meats and bounds, because it kind of sits on the fence between a Pale Ale and a true IPA. So an India Pale Ale, India, of course, for a very long time was a British colony. And beer, being, you know, reasonably low alcohol, doesn't have a lot of acidity. When it's, you know, down in the, you know, frequently waterlogged hold of a wooden sailing ship going around the world, it didn't hold up well. So there were some breweries based in London, particularly one called Wolseley's, that basically said, okay, well, what do we know preserves beer? Well, hops preserve beer, let's add more hops. High sugar content preserves beer, let's add some sugar. And high alcohol preserves beer better than anything. Before we give it to the soldiers, when it gets to India, we'll just water it down a bit. So that's kind of how India Pale Ale was originally created. Did it bear any resemblance to the India Pale Ales of today? Absolutely not. It would have been boiled extensively. It would have been a lot sweeter because it had a ton of sugar added. It would have been a lot darker because the pale malts that were made with Coke were actually quite a bit more expensive than darker malts, which ironically today is actually not true. Basic two-row pale malt is about the least expensive barley you can buy. But it was, you know, just an export market. It was a curiosity. It wasn't something that, you know, even when the troops came back from India, there wasn't a huge cry for it. That changed in about 1840 when a sailing ship that was due for India actually wrecked just off of Scotland. And a salvage company bought the rights to the ship, refloated it, and they brought it back, including some barrels. And in those barrels was the India Pale Ale, which they, you know, opened up basically in London and started selling because it was there and available. And that actually took off and started creating a market for these India Pale Ales in the UK. Now again, those styles wouldn't bear any resemblance to, you know, what we now know, but there were some India Pale Ales that in one form or another, at least on the label, struggled forward into today, including Alexander Keith's. I'm sure that Alexander Keith's, when it was brand new, was in fact an ale. It probably was quite hoppy, but, you know, quite a few years of selling it basically as a pale lager kind of interfered with that a little bit. I'm very glad to see that bars have stopped listing it as Alexander Keith's India Pale Ale, which is kind of a travesty when you see it. So let's get into the force majeure. We've talked about it enough. So when we talk about this New England style, so the modern IPA really came into the North American consciousness on the West Coast. Going back to Anchor Brewing and Fritz Maytag, in 1975 he launched Liberty Ale, which to me is very much like the meats and bounds. I don't think in the modern context you could really call it an India Pale Ale, but it was at the time so bitter and hoppy that most people couldn't drink it. It was a modest sales success because so many people found it so challenging. And if you want to call that kind of the forerunner of the modern IPA movement, I don't think you're too far off. Now, eventually that style of beer caught on and the IPA movement started to get popular, mostly because it was easy to say rather than a hoppy pale or a heavily hop pale. Just calling it an IPA kind of rolls off the tongue. And the breweries in the West Coast of the United States that started badging their beers that way really started taking off. Here in Canada, IPA was a bit of a project. I started drinking IPA myself in about 2002, and we got a little bit of Lagunitas in those days. We got a little bit of this, that, and the other thing, but really the only IPA that came in regularly enough and sold well enough that it was always fresh was actually Tree's Hophead. These New England IPAs, these came from a brewery called The Alchemist in Vermont, which got its start in about 2003. And in 2011, they had just canned this brand new beer called Heady Topper that was this new style of New England IPA that they hadn't even badged it yet. It was just this new IPA, and then Hurricane Irene hit, and it absolutely flooded the brewery. They couldn't be open. They couldn't sell draft. All they had to keep the brewery going were these cans of Heady Topper. And Heady Topper wasn't just a success, it was a runaway success. It was a massive hit. It single-handedly saved the brewery. And it created this absolute demand for it, which, if you were a beer trader like I was about 2011, here was this beer that everyone was giving, a 5 out of 5. Everybody had to try, everybody was talking about, and the brewery was underwater and they weren't making any more anytime soon. So prices got absolutely insane for it. Demand was absolutely off the charts. And the cans that did kind of leave that area, they started, inspiring other brewers. Of course, notably Blind Man, Annex, and now, Cabin, I think, has a new New England Pale Ale every other week, it seems like. So yeah, that's the New England style and IPAs in general. I realize I've kind of glossed over quite a bit here, but if you have questions, please hit me up in the comments. Now, one thing I note right off the hop with this, does anybody else find that the forward progress was almost a little more hop forward? Like, this is dank, this is rich, this has got a lot going on. You can kind of smell a little more sweetness and kind of dankness off the hops, but it's a little more subdued than the forward progress. The forward progress was really right up in your face. I will say right now, ever since Annex launched in 2017, my favorite beer from them all this time has been the forward progress. I absolutely love it. That was one of the inspirations to do this. And also the fact that we'd done so many other really great cabin breweries and we were almost pretending Annex didn't exist, which is a shame because they're awesome. Hello, Scotty. Welcome. So the mouthfeel here changes. The forward progress actually, I think, had a little more immediate hop bitterness and dryness, whereas this is a little more lush. You get more of that kind of passion fruit and mango and stone fruit, a little less of that kind of pine and citrus and grapefruit that you'd expect from the kind of the classic West Coast style. Beer trader, it was not a profession, it was an obsession for me. I got onto a site called Rate Beer back when that was a really, really big thing, and I got really obsessive about beer trading, about beer traveling. I went to so many amazing breweries. I used to go to Browers in Seattle every 6 months. I went to Rate Beer gatherings, which was just, hey, come to this cool place, we'll do some brewery tours, and at night we all sit around, just bring your rare stuff, bring the stuff that you don't think you could ever replace, and we'll just sit around and everybody will just do a big bottle share, and you can try all these crazy rare things. I've gotten to try things that I now see like going for $2,500, $2,700 a bottle, and I just got a free pour of it from a guy at a hotel lobby that I have never seen again. But yeah, I got to try that. It was pretty great. I don't miss it. I was part of the reason I gained so much weight was I was drinking so much beer, but yeah, I learned a ton about beer, and I got to try some really crazy rare stuff. I got to try Heady Topper about a year after it came out, the second or third batch of it that was made after the hurricane, and I was absolutely in love. I totally got it. And then when Blind Man started making the New England and Annex started making the Force Majeure, I was right there for it. It was a style that I really liked already. Oh, hello, Han. Welcome back. I think we missed you a little bit last week. I think I got so busy talking to that weirdo from Montana, Adam, that we missed out. It's nice to see you again. You've always wanted to try a Pliny the Elder. 2 beers I'll recommend to you then. Blind Man's Long Shadows. When I very first met Shane, he said that right out what they were aiming for with Long Shadows would always be an evolving beer until they thought it was as similar to Pliny the Elder as they could get it. So I find Blind Man Long Shadows very similar to Pliny the Elder. And the other one that really reminds me of it is actually Cabin Sunshine Rain. Has a lot of similarities to it as well. I really like both those beers, and I think they share a lot in common with it. Pliny the Elder is great. I actually got a chance to go to Younger Day a few years ago with my friend Barry. Apologies if I've told this story before. I don't think I have. But I actually got to meet Vinny Schillerzo from Russian River on Younger Day and sit down with him and actually talk with him for a couple hours. Wonderful people first, and maybe the most talented brewmaster on earth second. So if you haven't gone to Russian River, you absolutely should. It's one of the most incredible breweries, if not the most incredible brewery on planet Earth. They're based in Santa Rosa, California. While you're there, you can go to a Guy Fieri restaurant. You can visit Flavortown. You could also visit the Charles Schultz Museum, the Peanuts Museum, because that's also in Santa Rosa. But I've been there about 6 times. It's just outside of wine country. You're only about 45 minutes from San Francisco. And while you're there, you're just a little ways away from Petaluma, which is where Lagunitas is. You're not that far from Healdsburg, which is where Bear Republic is, which I don't think we've ever seen in Alberta. If we did, it was only one shipment. Another really, really top-class IPA producer. And yeah, I mean, there's actually... Tex Wasabi, Guy Fieri's very first restaurant, is literally a block down from Russian River, so excellent place to visit. Now I realize as I get to the meats and bounds here, I had 2 things I wanted to talk about when I got to the meats and bounds. The history of IPA with the British sailing ship in Scotland, and yeah, I already told that story. And I also wanted to talk about Anchor Liberty Ale, how it was kind of between an IPA and a pale ale, which this is. And I already told that story too. So I'm going to figure out some things to talk about with meats and bounds while I finish this beer and check the comments. You could really help me out with some comments. Difference is just the hops. Not just the hops, it's also going to be the brewing method. I imagine they go with a much more aggressive whirl and flocculation, or whirl flock step with the forward progress to clarify it. As we said when we were talking to, I think, Jesse from 88, the difference with these hazy beers is not just that, oh, they add some, wheat malt to add some color to it, which is how they make white IPAs, which, as I think about it, man, white IPAs dropped off the face of the earth all of a sudden. Like, I can remember when Chainbreaker by Deschutes was like our best-selling beer in the store, and Chainbreakers just disappeared. Anyway, tangent. But yeah, so with this, it's going to have like a flocculant added, some kind of protein, whether it's isinglass or Irish moss or something, basically to pull those solids out. They do add some toasted oats to this, or some oat malt to this to give it a little bit of that. But a lot of it's actually just the hop proteins themselves coming off the hops that actually do contribute that hazy color. And Alicia, yes, you do always end up with a little bit of sediment, or almost always, with the New Englands, and that is predominantly, as I said, hop protein, or just some dry hop solids. Dry hopping, which is to say after the beer is effectively finished fermenting and is kind of sitting in bright tank ready for packaging, you add the hops then and let it soak. You can also add it when the beer is actually actively fermenting, but that fermentation process throws off a lot of heat and can destroy some of the finer hop compounds. Very often, once the beer is kind of settled down, it's just finishing up fermentation, you basically take a big kind of cheesecloth bag full of hops and just dip it in, or you can even just throw whole hops in there, depends on your method. But yeah, the dry hopping will leave some particulate of hop in the tank that you just can't get rid of sometimes. So yeah, I briefly mentioned white IPAs, which was kind of the idea that, again, Cabin probably wouldn't like me calling it that, but I would say that Rise and Shine, which we did back with our Wheat Week, I would say that that is in certain ways a white IPA. White IPAs were basically, let's make a Hefeweizen and let's absolutely hop the bloody piss out of it. Let's make it as hoppy and as powerful as an IPA, but let's give it a wheat ale Hefeweizen base. And for a couple of summers there, I'd say 2014, 2015, those summers, white IPAs might even be longer than that, but let's just say around 2014. They were just all we could sell. Great White Combine, Chainbreaker, just, it's been long enough now I can't remember some of the names, but it was the huge style that summer, and everybody had one. It's like how everybody has a New England Pale and a Sour these days. It was just huge at that time, and it was really quite something. Eric, I have as well. Annex has done a lot of really great work with the non-alcoholic side. They've introduced the ginger beer, a root beer, and I believe something else. I think they have a seasonal soda as well. I kind of like that some of these breweries are doing something more family-friendly, something socially responsible, where you can sit down I've never met an alcohol-free beer I actually liked. So if I'm, the designated driver, or I'm done with beer, I don't need any more, thank you very much, I have to work in the morning. I like having the option for like a craft brewed root beer or something. It's something that was really, really big in the US in the late 90s through to about 2015. You used to see them all the time. You go into a brew house and they'd have 10 new beers on tap, and they'd have like their own like in-house made root beer. For whatever reason, that never really transited to Canada. Like, we never got that. I don't know if our craft beer scene kind of came along late enough that that wasn't a thing. But yeah, it's a big thing in the US that you'll see like a lot of alcohol-free sodas kind of made on the side, still naturally brewed, made in their brewed kettle, just alcohol-free. And I really like their soda program. I think it's really, really good. I wish more breweries did it. Chad, yeah, used to the New England Pale having a little more fruit-forward hops. This one's a bit different. I think this one is perhaps maybe more, I don't know. I know in the next comment down, Annex did a ton of like one-offs and experimental runs kind of dialing in this recipe. They did a ton of kind of single versions of a New England Pale before they finally settled on the Force Majeure. I really love Force Majeure, but I think you're right. I think this is more dank and a little more weedy and a little more kind of green than a lot of them. And I think that's just the way that the style has moved on. Force Majeure has been kind of a settled recipe for, I'd say, 2 years now at least. Whereas, the new Summer Saturation that sold out in like 20 minutes for us, that's a brand new beer with a brand new style that can take advantage of the newest, most fruit-forward hops. Annex does have a limited beer release program. Unfortunately, it's mostly kegs, which will be fine. We're going to get growers going here sooner rather than later, actually. But yeah, a lot of the Annex stuff, they are not counting their limited releases, at least for here. So unfortunately, at the moment, we don't get the really rare stuff from Annex yet. And yeah, I love this peach apricot stone fruit thing, which I quite like. So this one is bitter but not hoppy. I disagree with you. I think if you'd had this meets and bounds after, say, like a Saison or after, say, a Hefeweizen, I don't consider the Cabin Rise and Shine all that hoppy as a beer, but when we got to it in like the wheat tasting, all of a sudden it tasted like a New England Pale Ale. I think this is on me. I did do this lineup earlier, and I finally settled on this. I chose this to be third because it's a little darker in color, and I think it's got a little more in common perhaps with an English-style bitter than it does with an American Pale or New England IPA. They call this an extra pale ale, ironically, because it's the darkest beer. It is least extra at being pale. But no, I think that's just the tasting order. This is actually a very hoppy beer. And yeah, Grizzly Paw, I really like their stuff. They make great sodas. We actually brought in their sodas for a while. Didn't sell quite well enough. Maybe the craft brewed soda game is picking up. Maybe we'll bring them back. But they were a tough sell for us. Now, this does, to me, remind me a little bit more of an English bitter. Perhaps not the most traditional one. I wouldn't, run this up against like the Express ESB from Endeavour, or say the Old Speckled Hen, or Fuller's London Pride. It's not that style. It doesn't have that steely British hops character that I so appreciate. But the idea that the hop aroma is muted, it's got a little darker color, and then you get that nice sharp raspy bitterness. To me, that's a really classic kind of pub style bitter. Now, it is clearly not a bitter because bitters are low in alcohol, so you can have like 4 or 5. This is 6%. That does not work as a bitter. But yeah, this is just a really nice kind of everyday beer. Meats and Bounds is one that I don't carry year round. I bring it in, I bring it out. It's one that does not as well as the Forward or the Force. It does well enough to kind of justify a shelf spot most of the time, but it's not something that we carry year round. I don't know, very much in that Anchor Liberty Ale style that I discussed earlier, kind of not quite an IPA, not quite your classic American Pale. It's not an English Pale Ale because it's not kind of rich enough or kind of oily enough. It's not quite an English bitter because the alcohol is too high. It's somewhere in that Pale Ale family, which is why they think they go with the term extra Pale Ale. It's its own thing, and I appreciate it for that because, let's be fair, craft beer for a very long time is chasing its tail. You know, we had that summer, I think we discussed with Shane, where Blind Man New England Pale was like everything everybody wanted to buy was Blind Man New England Pale. So everybody did a New England Pale. Sour started getting big a couple, 3 years ago. So now everyone and their mum has a sour. These guys are just saying, no, this is our own thing. It's what we like. We're going to keep going with it. And it's the slowest of these sellers from, actually, of all of the Annex beers, it's my slowest seller. But, you know, I still really like it because it's kind of honeyed and rich. And, yeah, it's kind of an English bitter without being an English bitter. And I appreciate it for that. What do I think of the Annex Brewery tasting room and patio? I've been a couple of times. It's very, very good. They generally have this food truck parked outside for really, really, really good food. And yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful space. It kind of follows the modern, style of small tasting room, painted stark white, so that the beers show up well. It's a very kind of, post 2010 tap room. I won't say that, particularly stands out in any way, but it's a very, very good tap room, and the food's good, the beer's good. What's not to like? I apologize if you can hear the phone going nuts. Aaron is trying to deal with that, but we are closed and the phone's just continuing to ring. And yeah, this is one that kind of grows on you. I think right off the very first sip, I would say, okay, well, 1, 2, 3 for me, but the more I have this, the more it's just kind of appealing to me. It's a very relaxing beer to drink. This is a very social beer to me. Or how about this? I think my palate would be tired after 2 of these and I'd want something else. I think I could keep going with this all night. Yeah, the Burger Kitchen. That's what it is. And did I... Nope, you're good. Not a pour I'm particularly proud of, but Yeah, I am too, Eric. I really like this. So let's jump along. I apologize if this is a little bit of a quicker tasting. Don't have a special guest tonight, so I don't have the time for banter. But we will roll along. So King's English is fairly new for us. It is a pale ale with black tea and lemon. Now, if you've been doing this for a while with us, this is not our first tea beer. We did the Situation Afternooner Tea Saison with our focus on Edmonton Week. And this is a style that I'm starting to see more and more and more. I don't think I'd ever seen a tea beer 3 years ago. Now I think we have at least 2 in the store, and I am quite confident that those are selling well enough. We're going to have some more right behind them. Adding tea to beer is not a new program. As we discussed, a lot of these beer styles originate in England. England very famous for tea, of course. Tea was added to beer for a very long time as a flavoring compound. It was added to just about everything. But this is not a new idea. It's one that's kind of being resurrected, and it's one I really, really like. I have a feeling for a lot of people this is going to be a little bit of a love it or hate it sort of beer. I really, really like it, which is why I included it. I like the right off the hop, the immediate lemon, and then you get the big tea character. You get that orange bergamot character, orange pekoe and bergamot character. You get just the richness. I really like tea just in general, especially like classic Earl Grey, and this just jumps right out to me. Sorry, Scotty, I'll try to slow it down a little bit. It's tough doing it without a guest, because with a guest you can ask questions and they can take you on a virtual tour of the brewery and everything else. But if you want me to slow it down, why don't we talk about what we've got coming up for a beer tasting and wine tasting next week. Now, for wine this weekend, we are dipping our toe into France, and that is a dangerous thing to do because once you start talking about France, we're going to be on France for the next 6 months. Not every week, but we are going to be probably doing France now kind of 1 week in 3 just to get a good focus on it. Now we're going to start with two very different regions. On the outsides here, we have Cahors. Now, Cahors is the native home of Malbec in France. Now, if you were there for our Malbec week, we did talk about the fact that it's originally a Bordeaux grape and everything else, but in Bordeaux, Malbec is a small-time blending grape. It's not used for very much in Bordeaux, whereas in Cahors, it is, pardon me, by far and away the most important part of the blend. So the Gaudu, this is actually from Côte du Lot, just to the south, but this is a 100% Malbec done as a rosé. And then on the other hand, we have Cahors, which is the true region itself, 85 Malbec, 15 Merlot. So one red, one rosé from that part of France. And then we're going to just start edging ourselves into the Loire Valley. From the Loire, we are going to the region of Chinon, which is near the Touraine. So here we have a Chenin Blanc in a white, very dark glass, but that is a white wine. And then finally a Cabernet Franc based rosé. So yeah, going to get a couple of rosés, a white and a red. We learned our lesson with the Ryan Sturm tasting, which we had an amazing guest. He was an amazing speaker, but because we didn't have a red wine on the table, it was a slow seller. So I will be doing 2 rosés, a white and a red, because if you just do whites and rosés, nobody buys it, or less people buy it anyway. Now, as some spoiler-heavy people have pointed out, Sean, our next beer tasting is going to be Pilsners. Now, this is a topic I've been waiting on, in part because I really, really wanted part-time model to come back, but because Pilsner is also a huge, huge topic. I mean, just off the top of my head, when I think Pilsners, well, there's Czech Pils, there's German Pils, there's Italian Pils, there's American Pils. There's so many different styles, and they can go from anywhere from almost hop-free and just being a big kind of malt explosion, similar to like a German Helles, right up to the point where it's like the Forward Progress, but it's a lager. Some of the hoppy lagers out there, I think, really do owe a lot of their style to the Pilsners. We're going to taste 4, all from Alberta breweries again. From Lacombe, we have the Blyman 5 of Diamonds. From Calgary, we have the Bandit Peak Mount Crushmore 2. From Edmonton, we have the SYC Pontificato Italian Pils. And finally, also from Calgary, we have the Establishment Pils Nar, which is a Czech-style Pilsner. They call it a German. I like the, I feel like it's more a Czech style because it's super funky and cheesy. So yeah, that's our beer tasting for next week. Hopefully Scotty has caught up. And yeah, it is Pils weather. It is absolutely Pils weather. Yeah, Alicia, that is kind of the tricky bit, is having a guest. I don't mind doing these alone. I'm actually very comfortable doing them alone, but I do find that having a guest is helpful. I'm not going to throw Annex under the bus. I sent him a couple emails, didn't hear back. I wanted them here, but just for whatever reason didn't work out. The breweries in Calgary, if you guys have been up, they're all insanely busy. They probably just didn't get it, or I bounced off their spam filters. So sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. We tried to have them here. It just didn't work out. Honestly and truly, I know the folks from Annex a little tiny bit. I'm betting they just didn't get the email. So it happens. And yes, this is most definitely acceptable breakfast beer. What's the alcohol? 4.6. Yes, it's under 5. Acceptable for breakfast. Totally breakfast food. And yeah, Sean, I don't think that the beer's in there somewhere. I don't think it's that buried under the black tea and lemon, but there's a reason we saved it for last. I mean, this is something very unto itself. It has a pale ale base, but this is very much in that flavored beer category. I think this is one of the, like one of those, it's an imperial stout, but it has coffee and hot peppers and chocolate and cinnamon, and it's aged in a bourbon barrel and, all of that. I think this is one of those beer second, the flavor profile of the adjunct first. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I like that about it, but yeah, it is definitely a flavored beer. And I also think I would like this even colder. I think this would be a great one to have absolutely piercingly cold, just in the sense that an iced tea is best absolutely piercingly cold. I think this would actually be Very pleasant and very, very dangerous to drink, almost like a Long Island iced tea, which is a cocktail I personally really enjoy. Wow, Deirdre ranking this number one, 4213. All right, that's fair. Wobbly Wednesday, I like it. I got all these from the provincial wholesaler. I didn't buy them directly from Annex. So they brought the beer, but, not in a literal sense. In a literal sense, I ordered it from the provincial wholesaler, like I do basically everything else that I don't directly import. Speaking of, it is time to talk about things that are coming down from Calgary this Saturday. For those of you who have been curious about the Cabin Triple Threat, they're a new double New England IPA at 8.5%. That is coming down. A full 6 flats of it, which I have to thank Cabin. That's incredibly generous. I did not expect to get 6. I asked for 8 because I'm a dick and I expected to get 4. But I got 6, so they were very generous with us. We will have that on the shelf on late Saturday, early Sunday. Otherwise, top-ups from establishment, and if you missed out on the 88 Double Dare the first time it was through, I'm getting only 2 flats more of Double Dare, but we will have the second batch of Double Dare on the shelf as well. So we've got that too. Lance ranking 1, 2, 3, 4. I think that's the first time we've ever actually had a ranking like that. Do I want to rank these? I kind of do, 1. I really love Forward Progress. I've always loved Forward Progress. I kind of knew coming in that was going to be 1. I mean, gun in my head, that's probably one of my 5 favorite beers in the entire shop. I love that beer. 2. I love Long Island iced teas. I love this. Can I critically assess it as being a brilliant beer? No. Is it delicious anyway? Heck yes. I absolutely love it. 3 surprises me. I love the Force Majeure. I recommend it all the time. I've put it on tap places on my recommendation. I love Force Majeure. I'm giving it to the Meats. The Meats is really, really, really cool, and I really like it because it's so different. It doesn't fit in any particular box. It creates its own beer category. It's not a bitter. It's not an English pale. It's not an American pale. It's not an IPA. It's somewhere in the middle. I like it just being a convention breaker. I like it for being kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And then finally, the Force Majeure. It didn't do anything wrong. It doesn't deserve to be last, but I liked everything else more. Oh no, me and Craig doing a beer tasting. I'm game for it if you are, Craig. Oh, this is a terrible idea, but I can't wait to do it. Go on, Craig. Let's see your answer in the comments. 1432. Yeah, cool. Oh, okay. Craig's in. We have our first superfan special guest. Craig, I'll reach out. And perhaps for Pilsners, we'll have superfan Craig Colbert as our co-host. I'll reach out to you on social media, Craig, and we'll get this set up as soon as the cameras are off. Well, Grant, you will have to pay to see that show. Well, you won't to watch it, but you'll have to pay $20 if you want the beers. But assuming Craig's free this Wednesday, we are doing Pilsners with me and Craig. I didn't know that was going to happen this morning, but I'm glad it is now. No, it's happening. You don't have to vote for it. I've already decided. Unless Craig has, sober cold feet in the morning, we're going for this. Will you appear via drone? Not if I have anything to help do about it. We need a much more stable camera platform than that. Scotty, you're on board with the Force? I like the Force too. I just like everything else more. Deirdre, I know exactly what I've gotten myself into, and I encourage it. I can't wait for this madness. It's going to be great. I also know that Craig is going to spend the next week digging onto all the terrible technical details of Pilsners that I'm too lazy to dig into, and he's actually going to end up running the thing, and I'm just going to stand there with my hands folded and be like, yes, that sounds like a thing I know. So no, it's going to be great. I think this is our fastest event so far. Hello, Hand. Oh, the tea. Very well. I think this has been our fastest vent, but you know what? I'm not going to apologize for working my way through 4 beers this quickly, because I earned it. Today was a tough whole day. Thank you very, very much, everyone. And Craig, I will be in touch very, very shortly. I will stick around to answer comments and questions in the chat as always after the comments are closed and the video is off. But yeah, for the minute at least, I've been Kyle with Andrew Hilton Wine and Spirits. Thank you all so much for joining me. We will see you next week, June the 10th at 6 for Pilsners with me and Craig Coburn, because you asked for it. In the meantime, thank you all very, very much, and good night.